Welcome to the Fifth Trooper Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Fifth Trooper Podcast. My name is Jay Shalansky. Joining me today, as always, is Evan Trash Panda Bulris.
Hey guys.
Depressed as always. And also joining us today is Dustin from Jagged Studios. Hey man, how are you?
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, so now that you are part of the Fifth Trooper Ensemble cast, you get to come on the podcast. So that's fun.
I feel so privileged to have been invited.
That's what
Here's
they
your
all
one
say.
outing before you go back in the dungeon.
back to your paint dungeon.
I was going to say, chain me back to my desk, right?
That's right. Get back to work. So this is exciting. So I think today's cast, we're going to clearly with Dustin on, we're going to talk about the hobby aspect of the game. We're going to talk about painting, and we can cover Dustin's video that he did for us on the bases, and maybe a little hint at what he has coming up. And then later on, we got a pretty great interview with MOTF Luke from Australia. So we'll get to learn about Australia and how the community is down there and how Legion works down there, which is really exciting. But so let's just dive in. So Dustin, I don't know, for people who maybe are just getting introduced to you or just kind of got introduced to you when we announced that you were coming on board, what's kind of your background in hobbying and painting? How long have you been doing it? So on and so forth.
So I've been playing hobby miniature war games for about 11 years now. I started back with an old Privateer Press game called Hordes. Picked up a box set there, went to a local gaming store, demoed it, picked up a box set, and proceeded to completely butcher the miniatures that came in that box. So,
yeah, they were not fun to put together.
Well, I put them together fine. It was the paint that was applied to them that was just awful. And they were a nice bright jungle green color and a nice purple. I played the Legion of Everblight army, so they were green and purple lizards. And they looked like I just dunked them in some house paint and then picked out like 3 details and then gloss coated them, and that was it.
Perfect.
And so over the years, I've decided I got to the point to where I couldn't game as much as I wanted to. And the way that I get that itch out of my system is to paint at home with a family and a demanding job. It takes away my gaming time. So I can
Makes sense.
Yeah, I can paint and have played a few different games. And then when Legion came out, I said, well, I'm going to take this more seriously. I started prepping for Legion with some Imperial Assault stuff to practice on Star Wars miniatures. And I've been around the Legion community since it launched as Jagged Studios. And right after launch, I started taking some commissions, and I do a little bit of commission work here and there, but that's about it.
Yeah, he's ours now. No more commission work. No, I'm just yeah, I mean, it's so I've been doing wargaming for a long time, maybe about 12, 13 years, and a lot of my background was in Warhammer Fantasy. And man, it's funny how I think not only you as an artist grow as you progress through the hobby and learn from other players and see other techniques, but also the tools and the paints have really risen to the occasion as well. And so, I mean, how has that impacted kind of how you look at the hobby and the painting aspect? Like, has that changed your mind? I know you're a huge army painter supporter, and that's great because I love their stuff as well. But has anything really like completely changed the landscape for you recently or in the last couple of years?
To be honest, when I started, I was trying to do this on a budget, and so I just used some really cheap paints that I could get my hands on for a long time, and I tried to skirt around buying hobby paints for the longest amount of time, true miniature hobby paints. And so I used some of the the cheap dollar a bottle stuff, and it was okay, but it never worked well. And then I was like, well, I can get some Liquitex acrylics at Michael's for like 40% off, and I tried those, and they were okay too. And then when I finally took the plunge into hobby craft paint, or the true hobby paints, it really upped that game and made painting just so much easier. But I'm a firm believer in that you have to have the skills before you blame the tools. So, the number one question I always get asked is, what's your favorite tool? And what I tell them is practice.
Oh yeah, man. Like I have a So I did the same thing. I went to Michael's. No, I'm sorry, Hobby Lobby, and I was in the paint section, and I saw Tester's paints for $1.36, and I'm like, man, these guys are idiots for buying this hobby paint. This stuff's a steal. $6 a bottle. Man, I am so smart. So I bought a ton of it, and it's not the it was the oil based paint, not the it's not acrylic,
The enamels,
right? So
right.
it was yeah, it was all enamel, and so I do first last post every once in a while, like my first stormtrooper. So I paint it with enamel, and I didn't have any thinner because I didn't know, so I couldn't get out of my brushes, couldn't get out of my sink, couldn't get out of anything I had. It was on my hands for days, like. But so I finally painted like a full squad of stormtroopers, and then to even save more time, I saw Army Painter had the quick dip, which I like now because I know how to use it. So then I quick dipped them, and it kind of like melted the figures a little bit. So then I'm like, and I was outside shaking them off. I'm like, man, I am so smart. Everyone else is so stupid. And then I look at them the next morning because I was outside in the dark, like dipping them and like shaking them off. To realize the disaster I had created. But I still keep those stormtroopers around as like hey, I was willing to show this to the public kind of thing. And people come in and they'll be really good painters at my local store, and they'll be like, "Ah, it's not that great." I'm like, "Look, man, like here's my first stormtrooper. Here's where I'm at now. This is a year of just practice. Don't feel like don't compare yourself to other people, right? Like just keep trying, and you'll notice gradual improvement. Mine was mostly just not using garbage paint for it.
Yeah, that one went a long way for me too. I made the similar mistake. I thought, well, there's Army Painter Quick Shade, and then I was like, but I definitely can get it cheaper. So I went to the Home Depot and bought some Minwax floor dip and dipped. And everyone was like, yeah, you can do that. It works great. And no, they look like I coated them in floor dip.
No, I did deck
Yes.
sealant for some of my clones because Jade be like, "Yeah, you can just get primer," and I was at Home Depot for something else.
But
I'm like,
all he heard was, "Yeah, you could go get primer."
primer.
He didn't listen to the rest of my sentence, which was, "Make sure it's plastic for
Nope.
plastic, and you can get it at Walmart, and it's fine." He just heard, "Oh, you can get primer anywhere."
So I've got a bunch of clones that are just gloss black, and and so well, I'm like, wow, $6 again, because it's like getting with like Armor Painter's like $14.99. I think Citadel's like $20 for a can of primer.
Yeah,
and now I know why. But like I sprayed all these clones, and then now I'm just like, well, if I ever leave them outside, man, water wicks right off. I can leave these outside, snow, mud, whatever. It's all Gucci. But yeah, that was I've got a bunch of clones right now that I'm figuring out how to fix. And
so that's the set you use once you've had a few drinks, right?
yeah, dude, that's when I brought him to a prime because I didn't have him ready. I'm like, well, it's over. So I just put it out, and people are like, what's going on here, buddy? And I'm like, look, man, like this story is gonna get real sad. Let's just say I made some mistakes. And so he's going around looking at painting. I'm like, don't, please, just keep walking. Like, don't.
Oh man,
just keep going. Don't linger on this. It's gonna be sad.
But I think it's we're laughing, but I mean I'm laughing with Evan because I have definitely made mistakes.
Oh no, I find it hilarious, man. Like back after I sprayed him, I thought I was so smart. Again, I'm like, yeah, I'm genius. And then like I bought paint and I was trying to put it on it, and it wasn't like applying, it was just kind of pushing it around, and I'm like, well, that's bad. Yeah, this is going to be a long day.
Well, and I mean, Dustin, I'm sure this is the same for you, but like, I don't know. I would say I'm an okay painter now of my minis, and but a lot of that is experimentation. And what I'll do is, like, for instance, so Legion. Let's take Legion for an example. Let's take Stormtroopers, or even let's take Stormtroopers. So what I'll do is, if I'm going to paint something unique, because I don't generally like to do the standard Stormtrooper paint scheme, the gray or black lines along the shadow of the armor. What I like to do is kind of create like unique looks for them, like, oh, hey, these guys have been out in the desert for like years, right? And how would that look? And what I'll do is I'll take the HH12, because I know I'm literally never going to use that, and I'll just prime that up and then start testing on that.
I've tested on a few. That was what IA was for me, was testing on those miniatures, and they turned out well, and I keep them for my personal collection and play it. But that was what I used as a test, because most of the models that we're getting now are either the same as IA as far as the type of unit, or they're similar. So most of my personal stuff is all box art because I have to have a demo picture to show people, hey, this is what it can look like. And then customers are the ones that let me play around with it. And then for Christmas, this last 2 Christmases ago, I painted a whole army for my son, and he wanted an Imperial army. So I painted it all black and red, and got to play around with that. So it was all experimentation though, because I'd not done it before.
Right. And I think sometimes that can be scary for people who are just getting into the hobby. Is I think a lot of people, and Evan, I don't know, somebody who's newer to the painting side of the hobby, was that kind of what, did you like out of the box? Did you want like perfection? Like, were you like, oh, I, or whatever idea you had in your head, you're like, this is going to happen this way?
Oh man. Yeah. So I have a problem in my mind when I'm not immediately great at something, I get discouraged. So it's just like, I painted them and I'm like, well, the problem is also we have a bunch of guys in my store who are awesome. That's not the problem for them, problem for me. And so immediately after I painted one, I'm like, wow, I'm really terrible at this. And so it took a lot of like self improvement to be like, nah, just get through it. Just keep painting, just keep doing it. Because this was the first miniature game I ever had to paint. I played X-Wing. That was my first miniature game. That, like, man, you miss being able to just crack open a ship, put it on the table, and like you're good to go. But yeah, it was a long time, man. Like even today, like I'm painting my clones as Tron troopers right now, and that's oh, you did?
I did some stormtroopers shortly after they released. For a customer wanted some Tron stormtroopers.
Oh man! All right, I might have to take a peek, see what you did, because I am making mistakes. So there's gonna be another group of like, it's it's just clones. I'll just buy more, I guess. Yeah, Control C, Control V, right? So all right, I'll have to take a pick. You'll have to
dig way back on the Facebook page for that one.
All right, yeah, I'll do that actually, because I'd like to see, because I'm doing that because I thought I could make the black look okay, as long as like I had a couple colors, and but the first couple I did actually I thought came out really good, and I tried green and it looks like he got gacked or slimed a little bit, and I'm like, oh gosh. But no man, it's definitely like it's probably like I'm doing my Imperials as Cobra Troopers right now, so I've got
I've not done those.
Cobra Commander. Yeah, Cobra Commander is my Darth Vader, and then all my everything's going to be Cobra themed. So I've got like some strike teams that look pretty good. So those are fun. I have a problem. Like I just can't do movie like white stormtroopers, because I want mine to be different, and that's another thing I have. Like another issue, I'm just like, that's got to be Evan, and then I start painting him, and then it just comes a mess.
Well, and I think there's two kind of schools out there of people, and like some of that for me, like painting things different came from the Warhammer world, is where it's like, yeah, they had the instructions on how to paint, step by step, but also I think just being creative is part of it. But then you definitely have that group of people that's just straight up like how it looks on the box or how it looked in the movie.
So for me, that's where I started with. Imperials will always be my core army, but with Rebels, I had a little more freedom to paint however I wanted to, because there's not like a picture of, outside of the heroes, the generic Rebel trooper doesn't really have a picture of this is what they are supposed to look like. So play around with the colors, do what you want to.
Yeah.
But with the Empire, my whole army, Empire-wise, is box art, straight from the movies.
So what has been your favorite unit to paint so far?
Bosk. I really enjoy painting Bosk. He's a lot of fun. The colors are cool, and he's got a lot of details to pick out. And then I really enjoyed Dooku as well.
Yeah, Dooku's model is really cool, actually. Like you get a lot of detail in his face.
Oh yeah, I found that out.
Yeah, he's still sitting in the box for me. I'll get there one of these days. So Dustin, you looking forward? So they announced the new tanks. I mean, we've known about them from a little while, but we got the preview articles the last couple of weeks. How excited are you to paint those?
I'm really excited to paint them. My difficulty comes in that I like doing these videos for people, but if I use my airbrush, then I'm not going to make a video on it. Namely, one, because it's really noisy, and two, because I feel like the general hobbyist doesn't have an airbrush handy, and when I do my videos, I want people to be able to copy what I'm doing brush-wise. I'm really excited to paint them for myself. I wish that something that large, I wish I could do without an airbrush, but I really need my airbrush for a vehicle like that.
It's a lot of like when I even did the downed ATST by hand, man, that took forever. And I didn't even do like a great job on it. Like it looks fine. Like it looks actually pretty good from my standard. But it just like I watched like 3 movies trying to get through that because a lot of it's just like getting the right colors in. Or just like so much area space you gotta like just brush. Even about one of those fat like unfortunately it was just GW at the time. Like fat like train brushes and I was just kind of like slopping it on just to get some color.
The
on
difficulty with that is getting the layers smooth because it's such a large area.
Yeah.
It just I struggle with getting it to not be streaky. So
Yeah, and so like what I did with the tank was I kind of leaned into that, and I think the tank more than the new to the Empire, the Imperial tank. I think you can lean into it more with that one because it's supposed to be kind of like dirtier and like it's more of a in the thick of things kind of a tank. And so you can lean into it a little bit where I just based it with like a gray and then I kind of did like a dry brush for like dust and like mud and added these kind of textures onto it so that you could play around a little bit more. But the 2 new tanks that are coming out, they're so clean looking, and like that droid tank, you want it to be like clean and pristine, like it just came out of the droid factory.
Yeah, like the factory line, right?
I've got battle damage in mine for mine. Yeah,
really?
I plan on doing some battle damage on it. But
that's cool.
But yeah, it's still not going to have that streakiness and the griminess of the Empire, the Gav tank.
Yeah, and so I almost wondered, like, it may be instead of doing a full video of with the airbrush, but it may be helpful just to do like a intro to airbrushing for people. Maybe somebody who wants to get into it. That may be a good idea.
Yeah, so I have some, the basing video that I did the other day, and I may be jumping ahead a section here, but
no, it's fine.
No, you're good. Yeah,
the basing video that I did for y'all. Honestly, you talked about experimenting. The desert base I did in there, I've never done that before. That was first time go on that video. So, and it worked.
Those came out really good too. Yeah, those came out
glad
really
it worked. But my next plan is to do like a hobby 101 video and kind of just show some of the tools because I feel like people getting started in the hobby think they need to have everything. And realistically, what you need is some paint and a couple paintbrushes to get started. And that's it. And a primer.
I could really benefit from that, yeah, because my basing technique was mostly just so it started with I had Army Painter Flock. I won Army Painter Flock from Nova Open, one of their like you lost a lot, so here's a prize kind of thing.
Huh?
So I would put white paint on the bottom and I'd dunk the base in the flock, and I'm like, yeah, it's snow, and I won a thing of little plant, put down little like tufts. From also losing in that raffle. Then so I put it's like snow with green. I'm like, yeah, it looks great. And then I put that on, and then I've upgraded to technical from GW, their Valhalla Blizzard. And I'm like, everything's snow because I don't have to work at it. So I just put like everyone's on snow now. And after I saw yours and like you made it pretty like straightforward and simple, like, yeah, man, just dunk it in this, use a little putty here, paint a couple of this, and you're good. And I'm like, oh wow, that looks way better. And he didn't like like just a little bit of effort. Like even if you just want to do your heroes or your like centerpieces like that, and you can kind of just like phone it in on like all the droids or something you have to do. Even just having your centerpiece look real clutch is like means a lot. Like to look at.
So I took the desert base that I did. I wanted my droids to be on desert, and I wasn't happy with the picture that I have of them online right now. And I stripped all the bases off and rebased them, and it took me 2 hours to do 6 squads of B1 troopers or B1 droids and Dooku and Grievous's base. 6 hours total, or not 6 hours, 2 hours, including drying time.
Yeah, that's like nothing, man. That's me
that
trying to get through like two clone troopers that you you just rebased all your guys. No, that's like I think a lot of people get scared when they see some of these like higher end stuff. Like, oh man, that must take forever. But like, yeah, you said you just pounded through. I mean, of course you've done it a few times, but like 2 hours to do a ton of guys to make your base look like real like more than table ready, right? Like really nice. So that's not bad.
So if you go back and look at my personal boss that I did, it has a big tree looking piece sticking up off the base. It's a branch that I broke. But I broke it down, put it on there, and it makes it look like a tree behind Bosk, and he's kind of got his back up against it. And
Oh, that's really cool.
but the base of it is real simple. It's just some of that Liquitex resin sand I used and some basic grass flock. But those focal points, those special details are what really make it stand out. So, sticking that stick on there, gluing it to it, really made the base look that much better, even though it's really a simple thing.
No, 100% agree. Like, especially I'd be interested in that video where you go over, what you need even just to get started. Because I just bought randomly. I didn't know, So now my store didn't have any of the Army Painter like kits, so I just have to kind of piecemeal from what was there.
Yeah.
And now, like, they do put out like just like here's cutters, a little board, like pretty much everything you need just to get modeling. And it'd be good to take like the next step of like here's what I recommend to do. If you don't have that kind of option for you.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
really
and
cool.
a lot of the stuff that I'll recommend is actually going to not be from your hobby store. So, in the last basing video, I said some of my most specialized basing materials come from my backyard. So, you don't have to spend a bunch of money. You can get a lot of this stuff for free, because I know a lot of people are afraid of the upfront investment. I just bought all this plastic, and now you're telling me I have to go buy all these other specialty materials.
Well, we're in luck since we live in upstate New York. We got tons of snow for Evan, so
Yeah.
he can.
Wow, God, the snow's free outside. They just leave it all over the
You can make
place.
you can make
Suckers.
snow with salt too, and I hear there's a bit of that here.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, we
Man, they're
definitely
just-
got salt.
They're just dumping it out of trucks, idiots. Like, thanks, morons. This free stuff.
Okay, so on that topic of using random items, what's something, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but what's an item, like a simple everyday item that someone could use and create something that maybe we wouldn't think we could create with it? Do you have anything off the top of your head?
Pill bottles make great miniature holders.
Oh, there you go.
So you can also turn them into great terrain. So they make really good tanks.
Yeah.
So if you have some of the larger pill bottles, you leave the cap on, paint them up, glue the cap on, turn them on their side, and you've got like a chemical tank or something, or even turn it upside down and it makes it look like a chemical tank.
Oh, okay, yeah, man, easy.
But there you go, Evan. Done
Perfect.
and done.
Done, easy.
Let's
GG.
go get all your pills.
all my rabies medication.
Just dump them out. You don't need them.
Yeah, it's fine, man. Dummies, give me these free pills, suckers.
So, so you're a big fan and proponent of Army Painter. So since you got into the hobby painting, is it just been Army Painter for you? Have you dabbled in any of the other paints a little bit here or there? Or, I mean, they're good. Like, I'm not saying you should not use Army Painter. What I'm saying is, I'm asking Dustin if he's used anything.
So when I started, my very first paints were P3 because I was buying Privateer Press models. I bought a couple of P3 paints, and then I only bought like 4 bottles of it, the ridiculous colors I needed to paint that army. And they were great, but I didn't want to pay $6 a bottle. So, I dabbled in craft store paints. I have a few GW colors that I hadn't been able to find replacements for in the Army Painter line at that point, but I have since been able to locate. So I did some Citadel stuff for a minute. I've not used Vallejo. I've not used Reaper. So it's been either P3, Citadel, or now I pretty much exclusively use Army Painter.
Yeah. And I would say, so for me personally, my two, I have tons of paint, and the two major ones are, I have Army Painter and Citadel. Those are my favorites, and for different reasons, like depending on what I'm painting, depending on what kind of color I want or what kind of consistency I want on my paint, I can pick and choose. And I would say that for anyone new to the hobby, you don't have to you don't have to go one direction. You can play and kind of see what makes sense for you and your style, and then have a bunch of both, or all three, or all five, or whatever you want, right? Whatever looks good to you and whatever makes sense.
Yeah, there's none of the brands are bad. I use Army Painter a lot, just for transparency. I'm sponsored by them, so but that was because I used their stuff and they saw that I was using a lot. But the other brands aren't bad. They all serve
Right.
a purpose, and honestly, the best paints are the ones that are going to get you painting more stuff.
No, that's fair. Yeah, I made fun of the Star Wars, the official Legion paints. I'm like, blaster bolt, Brad, that's dumb. Whoa, what a dumb name for paint. And then like I've got all these other paints. And then I was at the store and they had like it was like 25% off day. And I'm like, well, that's a lot of paint in there. I need to do my Hoth guys, and they had kind of the colors, and I bought it. And I feel bad for making fun of it so much because all the colors do work very well for it. But I end up liking I'm a fan of some of the Vallejo greens. They really do good looking camo. Yeah, but it's right though, right? Like so sometimes like it's just whatever you like for colors and whatever you got to go to get it. Like the Turbo Dork stuff, man, they do some of that like neon pink like stuff is pretty awesome for the different like metallic colors they do.
Yeah, I would say it's right. I mean, because art is so subjective, and painting minis is an art form. So I would say picking your paints is going to be subjective too, and what you want to paint
No,
with.
sure.
Not everybody paints with oils, not everybody paints with watercolors, right? So I think there's opportunity out there, and there's plenty
And
of
every
brands.
paint has a different consistency and paints and acts differently when you put it on there. And I'm really happy with the Army Painter stuff. I know a lot of people complain that it's too thin or too thick or whatever it happens to be. You just got to shake the snot out of it. I have a fancy vortex mixer to do that for me now, but if you don't like it, switch to another brand. Find what you work with. Turbo Dork, I've not used it. I know I have a good buddy that swears by it. So it's all on what's going to make you happiest.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it's just finding what you need for those models. Like Army Painter has a lot of really good flesh washes that
They do actually.
that like Citadel doesn't have. You know what I mean? And so I love using their washes. I really like some of their metallics, and their green line is really good. I really like their I know this is gonna sound weird, but their greens for some reason always like stick out for me, and I like them a lot.
Contrast black actually does a lot for me too. The contrast paints.
Yeah.
I bought a bunch. Wasn't a fan of some of them, but black and white. White was great for my Tauntauns and my Rebel Troopers, and then black was great for all the clones I'm doing. But also, yeah, I didn't know you had to shake those a lot, so I was putting it on, and I'm like,
oh man,
well, this looks like trash. I paid like $8 for this. Like, then I see like the thick, like because it settles because it's been on the store shelf for a little while, and you don't just shake those a little bit. You shake those like for like 10 minutes, man. Like I wish I was exaggerating a little more, but that's I've learned the hard way in just about everything.
I enlisted my children before getting the Vortex mixer a couple months ago to shake my Army Painter bottles for me.
Nice.
So
but yeah, so is there any other like little just off the cuff tips or tricks that you would have for new hobbyists out there?
Take care of your brushes. You don't have to buy the world's nicest brushes to paint these minis. A Winsor & Newton Series 7 is going to run you $20+. And if you're new to painting, you will ruin it in 5 sessions. So go to your local hobby craft store, and buy that bag of brushes that's $10, because you won't feel bad when you destroy it 10 minutes later. But clean them out. Make sure you do that. Thin your paints. Just thin them a little bit. Water is a great tool to thin your paints with.
Yeah, and so when you say that, because you're talking about that'll minimize streaking, right? When you're painting on the models.
So it's easier to work with when you are using thick paint. It's harder to move around on the model. You have to apply more pressure. You have to work harder to get it to where you want to, and then you end up applying a pressure and over painting an area, so it makes those mistakes. And then the thinner paint also does prevent that streaking from occurring. The brush strokes that you want to minimize those brush strokes by thinning it a little bit.
All right. Well, cool. You know what? Let's take a minute here, and actually, it's going to be a number of minutes, but we're gonna go listen to our interview with MOTF Luke now, and we'll be back in a little bit.
Ground crew, can you hear me?
And joining us now is MOTF Luke from Australia. How's it going, Luke?
Yeah, really good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. And for everyone at home, don't worry if your children are with you. We've given him the warning on a few different swear words. He won't be saying them. I promise. And if he does, we'll definitely beep him out. It won't be like that Adepticon debacle that we
10
had.
words you can't say on our podcast.
Yeah, we need like electroshock therapy, right? Like, like as soon as it comes like onto like the tip of my tongue, it just starts like buzzing out.
I really think the problem was from Adepticon. So for those of you that don't know, we streamed Adepticon last year. Luke just came off of a game, came on the stream and was like, "Hey, F F F F F," and so, which is fine. I think we're okay with that. But we sometimes YouTube doesn't like that stuff. So, but it was funny, and a lot of people were commenting in the chat. But I think really what had happened, because the next day when you ran in the booth with us, you were fine. I think it was just because you just came off that game, and I'm guessing tensions were a little high, so you were just like, all right, this is what I'm gonna say. Here we go.
I love
that was a rough weekend for you too.
I love that you just like set up all of this like legitimate excuse, like, yeah, man, guy just got crushed on a stream. It was all about the tension, and I'm sitting here like, yeah, no, that's just unfortunately how I am on my day to day. Hey, like,
that all that stuff he just.
I was really trying to protect you there, but
no,
you do you.
No, let me come out here, right? Like the ESPN desk, that's what you saw. That was like professional Luke. That's what you saw, and the like in the sleeveless singlet, dropping F-bomb after F-bomb. That was the baseline.
I mean, it was completely Australian to do that the dress, the vocabulary, like everyone. I think we were forgiven as a whole by our audience because they were just like, yeah, I mean, right? Isn't that what they all do?
Right? Like this guy is for sure Australian. Like
this guy, 110%.
Right? They're definitely not a character. It's not an actor. Yeah. So Luke, the reason we're having you on is part of our ongoing series of having our international friends come on and talk. Couple really exciting things are going down in Australia. One actually already happened. You guys just had a huge Legion event. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I will say as well, it's really fantastic to see like more of an international presence, especially like sort of getting broadcast out there into the US, which is like really exciting to see, and I think really helps grow this game. So I wanted to thank you for having me on today. But yeah, we just had a massive event at so we have it's kind of like a big convention. It's kind of not obviously the size of like Nova or Gen Con, but it's the biggest like miniatures focused convention here in Australia called CanCon. And yeah, we ran a tournament. It was a grand championship in the end for Star Wars Legion, and we ended up having 45 players, which was easily the biggest event we've ever had in Australia. And in general, just like even internationally, like apart from LVO, is still really quite up there for event size.
Yeah,
so it was
quite
great.
a big turnout.
Yeah, it was really fantastic to see that sort of growth. Like by comparison, last year's CanCon, and I'm not saying like they're correlated or anything, but I didn't run that one. Only had about 12 people turn up. So yeah, huge growth in the game across just a year.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we see that on the community side too, because I mean, how many community members have content creators have started up, right? Just in just since we've started, there was like a couple podcasts, and now I don't even know how many there are anymore. And this is all just for one game.
Yeah.
So super exciting.
Exactly. I think it's a really like good sign and like indicator of the game's health. Obviously to see more and more content creators, I think that's sort of like a really good barometer. But then obviously the best barometer is tournament turnout. And I think everything we've been seeing, both in the US and internationally, is that Legion really is in its like big growth sort of phase. And I don't think that's surprising given the release of Clone Wars and just sort of now the sort of maturity of the game overall. But it's a really exciting place and time to be in.
Well, right, because now there's 4 factions. Right, when it was just Republic versus Empire, even me as a diehard was kind of getting stale. But now there's 4 You don't know what you're going to see at some of these events,
Yeah, exactly. And I think more than that as well. I think there's also, I think my preference obviously is for the OG like Rebel Empire matchup. But for some people, their sort of their dream sort of faction is either Cis or Republic. And I think now that those factions are out there, there's heaps of people that have said, yes, this is it. Like, I was waiting for this. This is my time. I'm in.
So with that in mind, being able to see something different, what did you see at your event? Like, was it pretty on meta? Was there some exciting stuff that maybe was unique or something new, or was there anything that kind of stuck out in your mind besides the normal meta stuff?
Yeah, so one of the big things for me that actually kind of blew me away was the presence overall of Cis, of droids. They were only just below Rebels in terms of like overall number of players. Like our largest
Oh
player,
wow, okay.
our largest player base was the Empire, which had I think about like 20 people out of the 45, and there's like a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, there was like 12 rebels and then 9 or so droids, and that really blew me away. I really thought I didn't think they'd be like that high, especially given how new the factions were. Like Gar's number, which was around 4 or 5 off the top of my head, I was sort of more expecting of. But yeah, that was really exciting to sort of see that sort of new presence in terms of actual like meta, in terms of like lists. I mean, obviously there was a number of like Tauntaun lists, and a lot of Shores, obviously, because that's sort of what's strong. But actually, what was really exciting was the overall winners list. I found personally, I remember even like when I was watching the final cut game, I was sort of got to look at his list more in depth. And for me, I was like, damn, that's I wouldn't have picked that personally. But then when I was watching, and then obviously when I was thinking about it afterwards, I was like, that's kind of like I dig it. And basically, what it was Boba Veer's 2 Death Trooper units, an Imperial Royal Guard unit, and then like some Shores to round it out. No snipers, and it was sitting at about 9 activations.
Wow, that sounds pretty top heavy too.
Yeah, like super, like like sort of I would say 4 or 5 like big activations, and then not a lot like aside from that. And I was just like, damn, that's a really like intense list. Um, and yeah, I mean, it ended up going 5-1. Like, so he went 4-1 in the Swiss, and then he came out on top in the cut. So yeah, congratulations to Matthew Freya for his CanCon success. But yeah, that list really like interested me. I was really like just impressed by that. I'm always a little adverse to playing down an activation, but I know that it's totally okay. Like in terms of the meta, like I see 9 or even 8 activation lists do fine all the time. But for me personally, I always feel a little like, oh no, they're out activating me, and I feel a little scared if I'm honest when I'm at the table.
Yeah, I think that can definitely get in your head sometimes. sometimes.
No, sure. Yeah, especially if you're playing Gar and you're going at 8 and you lose one pretty quick, and you're already like playing Rebels and they've got 11 or 12, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to watch them play for like half an hour after this.
Right, exactly. And it's just sort of, I think, like, I will admit, like, I think a big part of that for me comes from, like, my original background, obviously, is with Star Wars Armada, and that has, obviously, the very similar, like, I go, you go system. But back then, with Armada, initiative is tied to your bid, and it's static, so it doesn't rotate across, round to round based off, like, Armada doesn't have, like, a command card system, which is something that I really prefer about Legion. And so, yeah, if you're first player, you're always first player. So being out activated is huge, because if you're out activated and your opponent is first, they always get first last, which is obviously very devastating. Like,
Yeah, it's brutal.
yeah. So I think that is probably like a hang up from that, because I do feel in the early turns it's can be important, because you obviously, the classic, you get to wait out your opponent and sort of see what they're doing, and if you have like good activation control and your key pieces, you get to move with them later in the round and sort of respond to your opponent's moves. But really, by like the mid game onwards, it's more at the start of the round that activation is important, and really at that point it doesn't matter anymore in my mind if you're out activated or not, because it's more about who's going first and with what. Which is, again, is something I really like about this game.
Yeah, and so that all sounds pretty interesting. And I mean, we saw something similar at LVO where, I think the top lists were very meta focused, even though, Pelp, there's 2 Pelp lists in the top 8, but they did have the Shore gun lines, and we saw a lot of tons, but there was a ton of heavies at at LVO, and also like one of the funny things was I think it was the third most popular support unit was eWebs at LVO, which I thought,
really?
yeah, that was really interesting too. So I think we're at this great point in the game where, with the new factions, with all the new units that are coming out for the original two factions, that I think list building is probably easier than it's ever been, as far as bringing something that can compete on a higher level like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so funnily enough, with your eWeb comment, just reminded me. Yeah, one of our top, I believe it was one of our top 8 had 3 eWebs, which again was another like wild.
Man.
You know what I mean?
Jeez.
Yeah, I was just like, damn. And then obviously it was, it was working out for him. And then yeah,
Well,
exactly.
yeah, if you think about that, it's like 170 points, range 3, surge to crit, 3 red, 2 black, 2 white apiece. Like standby, that's not bad, right?
Right,
Yeah.
and I think, I think sort of the strategy behind that list is also that sort of critical mass. Like you might be able to, easily focus down one eWeb, but what are you going to do when I have 3? Which
Perfect.
I just again, it's just really, I think that's sort of the really exciting part about going to a big event. Like even obviously as a tournament organizer, I personally wasn't playing. It's really exciting to see that everyone's different ideas about what is good or what they think can work really well at a high level. And obviously, not all the time are we correct, right? Like I don't know about you
Yeah.
guys, but I've taken something that I've gone, this is it, this is the killer, to an
Yeah.
event, and then had that thoroughly disproven by reality at the event. But still, it's very interesting to sort of see, like, what people, what people's conception about the game and what is good is, and to sort of then field test that and stress test that. And obviously, there's an element of player skill, undoubtedly. That's like what separates the best players. I mean, there's a reason Luke Cook has won not only Worlds but now LVO, right? It's not down to the fact that he had
Jeez,
a
yeah.
sick list.
And multiple primes to our dismay, because we play with him in all of them.
Yeah, it keeps showing up.
You see him just like walk in doing the classic, like, hey, I'm just here to see who's going to come second, like.
Well, we're like in group text and stuff with him, and every time he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to that, there's just this collective sigh from everyone that's like, oh man.
Don't you have enough gold to sleep on, Dragon? Let some of the peasants have some.
Please, sir, just one. Just one.
I just want one of the miniature boxes, sire. Just one.
Okay, so I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of the community down in Australia. And one of the questions, though, like one of the things I'd like for you to do, Luke, is I don't know how many of our listeners or how many people out there really understand Australia geographically speaking. So, and I wonder if that plays into a little bit how the community is down there. And so if you could maybe like explain geographically how it lays out, but then also how does that affect the community? Are there pockets like in the major cities? Like what about the people in between the cities? Like how does that all work for you guys down there?
Yeah, so this is definitely something, and it's not just obviously exclusive to Legion, but it's just sort of, applies to all of our miniatures games. And so to think about the geography of Australia, the first thing that really helps like Americans sort of wrap their heads around it. So the continent of Australia is basically about the size of the continental United States. So we're big. We're as big as you guys, basically. Like we're a little bit. You have like more area overall, but we're pretty much about roughly the same size. We are not anywhere near the same population. I don't know if you guys know, but you guys are like the big chungus, and we are not. We have about, I think last count, we have about 26 million people spread across roughly the same sort of like landmass. But the other big difference as well is, we're very heavily clustered into our big sort of cities that are along the coastline. So I actually just saw this stat only about a week ago. So between Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, between those 3 cities is about 50% of Australia's total population. Just those 3 cities. And then if you throw in a couple other ones like Adelaide and Perth, you end up at around the 65 to 70% mark, I think. Like, don't quote me on that, but yeah. So we're very
well. And to put this into perspective, just a little bit, real quick. New York City, that little island, has roughly 9 million people in it. So almost half the population, or 1/3 of the population of Australia lives on the island of New York City in the United States.
Correct, right? And so what's interesting as well, so you say so Sydney is our largest city and then closely followed by Melbourne. So in terms of overall size, like the greater metropolitan Sydney has about, last count, I think 4.5 to 5 million people. So like our big cities are, still big. It's just that we don't have anywhere near like amount of, like, a really good example. This will sound really dark and bizarre, but so for us, so when we have like hurricanes, you guys call them, we call them cyclones. For us, we're really happy, generally speaking, when they go inland, just because, when they're hitting the coastal city, that's when there's a real risk, to human life. So when they go inland, it's like, obviously they're ruining farmers' livelihoods, but the population density just nosedives. And so the human life is, way less at risk. So I remember for me, there was a big hurricane, and it was sort of rolling through like the east coast of the US. And I'd heard on the news, like, yeah, it's heading inland. So I said, but rather sort of unthinkingly to my US friends, like, oh, that's great news. And they're like, what are you talking about, dude? There's like, it's just crossed over like 6 cities, with each of them has like 1 million people. And I'm like, oh, right.
Oh no,
because you guys are populated. right. That makes sense.
Right, and like, just to like further these numbers for everyone at home, New York State, the state of New York, has 20 million population, and we're pretty rural, like up where we are. Like, our closest city, Syracuse, what do you think, like 500,000 people?
Probably, yeah.
maybe less, maybe 300, 380 or something like that. But like, and we consider ourselves rural because of how spread out we are up here, but we still, it's just a single state in the United States have almost the same population as Australia.
Yeah, and then so like the other thing to sort of really put this in perspective as well. So where I've talked about, we sort of have these, 4 or 5 really big cities that sort of carry the bulk of the population. You really do end up as these pockets, like, and we do intermix, but at big events. But at, on a local level, it's very much these like sort of isolated pockets of, of resistance. Because just using like the east coast of Australia, for example, so Brisbane is like in, towards the like the north, like the more northern area of Australia, not like the tip or anything, but so there's Brisbane, and then 1,000 kilometers, which is, oh god, don't quote me on math. What is that in miles? I want to say about, what is it? It's 3 miles to 5 kilometers. So math is hard. I want to say, like,
no, please, let's spend the rest of the podcast. I want to hear you.
Yeah, right. Like, let's see how bad I am at math.
How many miles?
Right, but it's a lot. It's just, look, come on, it's 1,000 kilometers, but it's 1,000 kilometers thereabouts to Sydney, and then Sydney is about another 1,000 kilometers north of Melbourne. So in about a 2,000 kilometer sort of like up and down the coast, you have 3 of those cities. So they're not close. Like the best you can do is about it's about an hour flight. Or if you're driving it, it's a good 10 to 12 hour drive between just one of, like, going from Sydney to Brisbane or Melbourne to Sydney, and then double that if you're going, down the chain. So it's really, really isolated pockets that generally only intermingle at big events. It's very rare for like a prime that people would travel far. I've done it once for like a regional championship back in like Armada days when I was like really early on, and I was doing the equivalent of like, I just want a box of models, I want the gold, and I went and I went down to Melbourne for that. But that's pretty rare. Like, generally speaking, for sort of prime level events, you're sort of bound to what's in your sort of single city, because the next nearest one will probably be about 10 to 12 hours away, or like a flight, which then has its own costs.
Yeah, and and just for perspective for people, there were a lot of people in the US and even Canada a little bit, because we do have a lot of primes between the two, but we're like complaining that the closest prime was 3 hours from them. So just I mean, imagine, right? Like, your city got one prime, and your only other chance to get to one is 10 hours away, and they're only going to do one.
Yeah, like a flight almost. Right?
Yeah, and so it's like, it'd be like driving basically from New York City to Chicago to get to another prime. not even like a grand championship.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And normally, like, what happens as a result is, so normally, like, Sydney, in my experience, will get the equivalent of like a couple of primes. So like it won't even be like evenly distributed normally, because they obviously, the distributors are looking at like where they provably have the existing player base. And so they'll look at,
Yep.
like a bigger city like Sydney and say, okay, yeah, that we can support a couple of primes here, but that might mean that a smaller city like Perth or, Adelaide might miss out, which makes it even, harder yet again. So like Perth by like comparison is like the New York to LA equivalent. Like I've never been to Perth in my life, ever, just because it's just
Right.
on the other side of the country for me. So that sort of like intermingling is very rare and generally only will happen at big events, like CanCon, basically, or like other Grand Champ level events.
Okay, so with all that in mind, that's kind of a little geography lesson on Australia in comparison to the US. How is the community there? And I mean, it sounds like to me, from what I've seen, I deal with the guys in Sydney mostly, but like it seems like the groups are pretty close knit because you probably don't have that many people in your group. So it seems like the community's a little bit closer.
Yeah. So what's been really good for me, obviously, as a real sort of proponent of the game, is watching how much our communities have grown. Obviously, I'm much more interconnected with my local community, even if it's quite broad in Sydney. But each of the major cities, from what I can tell, has its own group, and like that might be a varying size. Like I would say, pretty safely, Sydney has the largest Legion group at the moment, and then maybe closely followed by Melbourne and Brisbane, and it's probably just sheer numbers of that's where the population is. But for example, I do know for a fact that there is a healthy little community in Perth, which is really good. So the community overall, like across Australia, is doing really well. And I would say, anecdotally, from my own experiences with my, quote unquote local community here in Sydney, it's been going from strength to strength since the game's release, and I think has really sort of picked up. I would say within the last 6 to 12 months, as the original factions really matured and came into their own, and started to get some really exciting options, and then obviously with the release of the two new factions. And as well, I think as well another huge part is that I think communities are very self-generating after a certain point, and I think that's why community events and like the running of events or leagues is really important, because I sort of, when I look at our sort of Sydney community, I can sort of pinpoint what really helped grow the community. And so my friend Ken, who's my partner in MOTF, he set up a league, like like a skirmish. Well, I mean, skirmish is probably misleading. That's what we call it, but it's not using the skirmish game type, using the full 800 points. He set up the Sydney Skirmish League, and that's designed to be sort of World Cup style. You be put into a pod, you play round robin against everyone in your pod, and then we advance to single eliminations. And then this sort of goes, normally each season will run across a couple of months so that people can sort of do it at their own pace and at their local, a friendly gaming store. And really, I think with the creation of that league, it started to really bring the community together, because it started to have people, mix and talk across different hobby stores and really get a wider idea of like, oh, hey, this is like the Sydney Legion community, rather than I know a couple of dudes at my local store. And then what that allowed us to do was we ran an event at another little mini convention called Moab here in September, and we ran a maximum firepower event. That's how weird Australia is. We ran that last year. Yeah, you heard that correct.
Yeah, I was saying like, oh, that sounds familiar. Oh,
yeah,
that's
I
old,
remember like LJ like sort of came, like we were talking about it and we were announcing it in the Discord, and LJ sort of like came in and was like, "What's the legality on the invites on this? Like, what's an MF doing in this season?" And we were like, "Look, hey man, we're just running it." But FFG fortunately, accepted the invites. They allowed them to be legal, which was fantastic for us. But yeah, we sold that event out. So that was the second largest event we've ever, like now after CanCon, that we've ever had in Australia, and that had 32 players. And I can pretty comfortably say the reason why we were able to sell that event out was because of the Skirmish League, because I think that that sort of built the community atmosphere and people, really wanting to go, not just because of how much they're enjoying the game, but also because of how much they have friends in the community or just enjoy, meeting new people in the community, and sort of, I guess, that trust that, oh, I'm going to go and I'll, like dollars to donuts, I'm going to have a good time. Right. And then what I feel as well is that, so with the way CanCon works, so CanCon, obviously we're not the only tournament there, and we're not even closest to the biggest. Like the big fish, there's always a bigger fish. At CanCon for the minis tournaments is AOS, like Age of Sigmar, and they have a tournament with about 250 people, I think, off the top. Yeah, so they're huge. They are the big boys down at CanCon. And the way CanCon works, though, is that it has, a set, they can only accommodate a set number of tickets for tournaments. So even though you'll say, okay, like we want to run a tournament and we want to have like X amount of players, there is still like an element of like, you got to get those people to buy a ticket early. Otherwise you're at risk of, not, like overtly getting pushed out, but there's sort of like an element of like, hey man, what's going on here? If you haven't sort of hit your numbers. And so for us, I don't think if we hadn't run Moab successfully and, people hadn't seen how well that event went, I don't think we would have been able to convince necessarily the community in the sort of time frame that we were given to be on board for CanCon. Because in the end, we ended up selling CanCon out in about a week or so. And I think, and I think a huge part of that was, and not just for people that went to Moab, because a lot of people, who went to Moab weren't able to go to CanCon, but I think more importantly for the people that were sort of at home or in different states who weren't able to go, knew that we were going to run CanCon and were like, yep, I saw how good Moab went. I want in. Like sign me up. I'm on board.
Right.
And I sort of, my hope is that moving forward, that'll keep rolling on. And it seems like we're just about to start the new season for the Sydney Skirmish League, and the numbers for this season have jumped dramatically. Like last season, I think we had like about 30, and we've already jumped up to like 44, 45. And I think again that was like sort of the flow-on effect of CanCon looked awesome. There's this local sort of skirmish league I can get my feet wet in. Let's do that. And then obviously if I enjoy it, they're gonna hang around. And I think that's sort of how, like, over time you just build and build and build.
Yeah, and I think the big thing, and I mean it's the same everywhere, I believe, is transitioning the casual players into, I say competitive loosely, and I kind of put it in air quotes, but transitioning casual players who will do a skirmish game, who will do the painting in the hobby, and trying to transition them into the competitive area where that they'll go to these bigger tournaments and really play.
Well, it's like you can call it like relaxed to formal, right?
Yeah.
Like relaxed players do skirmishes and like the down DTST stuff like that, and then FFG labels as a formal event where you just like you're expected to know point changes and rules, but honestly, like you're good after that, right? Like to go to those events to show up.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah,
go
exactly.
ahead,
And I think, I feel pretty comfortable saying we're all sort of really comfortable here in this chat of being at a competitive event. And I think sometimes it's sort of hard to put yourself back in that shoes, like that sort of position of, what if you've never gone to a competitive event before? And I think for a lot of players sort of in that position, maybe like fear is like too strong a word, but you know what I mean? Like, but a certain level of nervousness about doing that, like,
Oh yeah.
Sure,
whether
that's
or
very
not,
common, yeah.
people, I think there is this sort of like nervousness or anxiety about, that, like a hardcore competitive gamer will, get upset at me for not knowing a rule or something like that, or, I'm going to have a bad time. And I think, I think sort of converting, like making someone feel comfortable enough to be at a formal event and know that doesn't mean like it's going to be, like serious business, air quotes, gaming all the time, and that it's just going to be unenjoyable. Because I think, on some level, that's the concern that some players trying to make that transition or thinking about it have. I think that's a really important aspect, at least in terms of trying to obviously get those numbers up, because the casual players is sort of how a lot of players come into the game, right? They go to like a gaming store, or they'll see it on YouTube or something. They'll see this sweet looking game in the Star Wars IP that they love, and they just go, "Yep, sign me up, I'm in." Right, and they're on board for just the game, and now you go to convince them, like, "Hey man, come be a part of the bigger sort of premier event community," and that's a different kettle of fish sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Luke, where can people find you? Like, what are you doing in the community these days?
I got
What you
a lot.
going
It's
on,
really
Luke?
actually it's been really exciting. That was like a great part about CanCon. That was my first ever. That was the first time I've ever organized a tournament officially. Obviously, we sort of on the side basically organized and at minimum promoted Moab, but this was pretty overtly my first time around as the final like head organizer. And so it was simultaneously incredibly exciting and terrifying. Like I had a couple of moments where and this will sound like a little sad, but like I'm just very used to normally, like, if there's like a a big call that needs to be made, you just be like, "Hey man, just go talk to the TO." Like that's their call. And I had this like moment like day one, I was like, "Oh man, I'm that guy. I am the final word." Yeah, like
I'm the
I
TO.
was, and I was so paranoid about making like what I felt would be like a critical error, right? Like the real bad stuff up.
No,
But no,
sure, yeah.
like the community is so good that it ran incredibly smoothly, which was great. So that was really exciting, and I'm not going to be running it, but so basically what's happened is we sort of have a community events team that's sort of formed, and wants to continue running events for Star Wars Legion. So our next event is going to be the Greedo Memorial Classic in May. Which one? Yeah,
Nice.
which one of our team is going to be running, and that's going to be like a more casual event. It's going to be a 1-day skirmish event, which will be really fantastic. And then we're looking ahead. Word on the street is that there's going to be not run by us, but it'll be nice for me to be able to attend. But ostensibly there's going to be another Grand Champs sometime later on in the year, and then hopefully we'll be back at a big event level for Moab again in September, October. But in terms of like where we can be found, obviously, if you haven't seen MOTF, where you can Google MOTF YouTube. That's sort of our main home. That's our main base. We do battle reports and other video content for both Star Wars Legion and Star Wars Armada. And then in terms of what we're doing, we just started up a new Legion podcast called We Are Legion, which hopefully will just continue to improve. Maybe one day we'll be in the same league as the Fifth Trooper. But it's just yeah, right.
Oh,
Right, like
easy,
I'm
pal, right? Like,
right, like
geez,
that's
I
it.
say his thing, he starts
I'm coming for you.
taking a swing at us already.
You know what, Luke? You're already there, man.
Yeah,
Just starting
I
a
like it. I
podcast,
like
you're already there.
it. But no, and then the other sort of big thing, and that's been really exciting for me in the last sort of month or so. Basically, actually, since I've come back from CanCon, we've set up a community web store, which is called MOTF Community, and you can. I don't know. I feel like this will be one of those classic. Like there'll be a link in the description or something, but it's just like motfcommunity.com, and there you go.
There will not be a link
Yeah.
in the description.
Yeah.
You
All
guys
right.
need
All right.
to memorize this right now.
MOTF-community.com. But basically, it's sort of the vision behind that. So I'm the person running it. And right now, it's really just selling, like, what really all that we have available right now is just merchandise for our sort of YouTube channel. But sort of what I envision, hopefully, is we would like to. I've been in discussion with distributors for FFG product, and that should be all fine. And the only reason that I'm not going ahead with it right now is I'm about to go on holiday. So I didn't think it was sensible to be like, hi, I would like to buy a lot of FFG product and then leave the country. That seems like that seems very sensible. But basically, the vision behind that is we're going to run a very different model to what web stores do traditionally. So traditionally, web stores, I feel like you guys would be aware, their model normally is because they don't have the same overheads as a brick and mortar store. Their sort of avenue is to sell at a much lower cost, and then that's sort of where they make their money, is because people will say, all right, well, of course, I would like to buy cheaper sometimes. And then, there's some real tension there
Right.
at times, I think. I know for a fact a lot of brick and mortar stores are not exactly the biggest fans of web only stores. So yeah, we've got a very different model. We're basically effectively going to be run as a not for profit. We're going to sell, like, when eventually we do start selling FFG product, we're going to be selling at basically brick and mortar prices. And the incentive behind it is that 90% of all net profit from all of our, whatever we're selling, merchandise, miniatures, whatever, 90% of that is going to be rolled into funding these community events so that we can, afford, kits and prize support, and, in terms of Legion, building, like, setting up like a community sort of terrain pool, so that, because that was a huge thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I could have
That's
talked for
actually
15
really
minutes about that in
important.
terms of CanCon, like the logistics behind that. And I think it's really, really important moving forward, making sure that we have like a really high quality sort of terrain sort of tournament kit, like here in Australia, that we can use for these big events. And obviously, that doesn't come cheap. So yeah, 90% of all the net profit will be like folded back into that. And then the other 10% will go to charity. Because, man, again, another big thing from CanCon, we ran a like a raffle, like a charity raffle, and actually, it's good spruik for you guys. The prize support you gave us, or at least part of it, the mat, one of the lovely table mats that you guys sell. We had that as one of two big ticket prizes that we used to incentivize people to take part in this charity raffle, and we ended up raising $1,000 for like an animal rescue sort of collective that's been that's been doing a lot of great work
That's awesome.
following
Oh,
the
nice.
bushfires with a lot of local sort of animal community groups. So yeah, so obviously the idea is that 90% will be of net profit will be folded back into the community, and then the other 10% will go to charity. And what we're hoping is that the value for you as as a customer is that you're ending up with your hobby product or some sweet merchandise, but you're also knowing, like, I'm not taking like a I don't know like what the sort of money the Fifth Trooper guys are on, but we're not going to be taking like a fat paycheck. No, they're still going to be going to the community. Right. I've
only
heard
take
rumor
fat
about Mr.
paychecks.
Moneybags over here.
Let me put it this way: I
Whoa,
always say yes to
big
guacamole
spender.
on my nachos. I know, right? Like, no thought, just put it on. I'll
Well, I
do
would
it
say,
later.
that's an interesting point. I think a lot of what we do is we do exactly what you just brought up. Is we end up sending prize support out to guys like you. I forgot how much exactly we sent down to Australia, but it was enough. And
I can do like it's a real technical term. It was a lot. Yeah, it was. there is a certain term that I would like to use, but it involves a swear. So it's a something ton, right? That's what you
but
sent
yeah,
us.
I mean,
Okay.
we're 100% in support of the community, and this talking with Luke, and last week we talked with Jakob from Poland, and we're just trying to help build the community everywhere that we can, because in reality what happens is Australia seems like it's far away, it's on the other side of the planet, all this stuff you can say, but really you guys are going to be coming to us in Chicago in March to Adepticon, right? Your winners, if they can make it. Well, I guess does FFG pay for their trip? I don't know, but nope.
Nope.
Okay. So if you guys can make it, like Luke, you came last year to Adepticon, it'll be great to see the community from all over the world, and we can make this a truly a world's event, not like our World Series that's only U.S. baseball teams, but like a truly world's event.
Oh no, and I agree, and I think I do want to like clarify for all the listeners at home. Like, I knew it. I knew that man just doesn't even think about it. He just goes, "Give me that guac!" Like, straight. I knew it. It's so abundantly clear that yeah, like I want to make sure that in case it wasn't evident, that was super tongue in cheek, because yeah, you guys do exactly that. You sort of folding back into the community, like. And I can say this very like overtly, having had the good fortune to sit on the the Fifth Trooper ESPN desk at Adepticon last year. That setup. I'm not an expert, but it didn't seem cheap, and I have to imagine that running it and adding to it is not cheap. Like, I remember it was such a cool moment because we were right beside the leading X-Wing streamer, and no hate, no no hate or anything, but like Gold Squadron was right beside us, and they like you had this schmick. There was such a cool setup. Like we had everything. Like you had your little, like dashboard where you could be like, oh yeah, we've got like a pre-generated like animation for this. Let me just cue that up. Bang, right? We had everything. Then no offense, and I look across and I'm like, yo, you guys got like 2 sticks and a rock over there. What's going on? Like I see a laptop and a late 2000s webcam. That's what it looks like. But I think having that quality though is so important, right? Because for a lot of people, if you can't get to like a big event like Adepticon, it's so fun and so exciting to be able to sort of see that vicariously and sort of feel connected to that. And without that sort of the streaming sort of stuff that really I think you guys are at the forefront of, it's really really difficult. And especially like I will say from an international player's perspective, let alone a US, but especially from an international player's perspective, that's super important because even if we can get an international player presence out there, realistically, I think my intention originally was to go, but then my appendix was like, "Hey man, I want out," and that had me laid up for long enough for it to not be like financially feasible to come out this year. But I know a couple of Australians are going out, but that's the sort of normally that's the rule, right? Even if you have like an international presence, it's never going to be huge normally.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things, stuff like what you guys are doing and our streams and like helping build this community, not only for people who play, but I've had 3 people now come up to me and thank us for doing the stream, not because their friends could watch, but actually because their family could watch.
Yeah.
So like their wife or their their loved ones at home were watching them and like knowing what they were doing on that particular weekend at LVO or Adepticon or something, and I think that's really the key to building any community, is not just the members who have similar likes and interests to you, but also somehow figuring out how to get their family involved and supportive of it, because that's how you're going to keep those community members in the community, is if their extended family is also supporting them.
No, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, and it is, and I remember, especially like at Adepticon, I remember someone talking a bit about like, hey, like in the chat, like, hey, like my husband's at this event. How's he doing? And it was really exciting because I think we got back to her about like what he was like his record, and it was, she was super excited because I think he was doing well.
Yeah.
And that you're right, like that interaction is really like fantastic. And I think another thing as well is that it's just such like, obviously while we're doing it, for the people that are already involved or sort of tangentially related, it's also I think just such a great way to sort of advertise the game as well. Like I know from like our own channel's perspective, although it might not be as family friendly,
That's fine.
I've had a lot of people that obviously if they're just like randomly on YouTube and then have sort of ended up somehow like through the mystical algorithms that YouTube pulls, have ended up on our channel, and then we've had like a fair number of comments say like, hey, like you're the reason I got into this game because I watched you guys playing this, or I watched a stream of Adepticon or LVO, and it just looked great, and it looked like everyone was having a good time. And I think that more than anything is the best advertisement for a game like this, right? Like you see other people having a good time, and especially Star Wars is not hard to sell to begin with. So if you see someone like pushing around little Luke Skywalkers and they look like they're having a really good time, you're like, hell yeah, I want in. Sign me up.
That's 100% true. That's why I even started. So I wanted to get into a miniatures game. Like I liked X-Wing, and then I was going to get into, Bolt Action, I believe. And then like right before they're like, oh, hey, turns out we're making a, Warhammer style Star Wars game, FFG is putting it out. And I'm like, oh, well, that's convenient. So I just dropped what I was doing with that and I got into this, and it was like, turned out good choice.
Yeah, working out well for you, little trash panda.
Hey man, sometimes people throw away some onion rings at these events, and it really works out. Play the long game.
Oh, that's it, man. That's it.
All right, Luke. Well, I think this was a good amount of time. I think we can wrap it up. I think we've heard just about enough about Australia. No, I'm just kidding.
This will be the last time we ever have an Australian on the channel. Just let you roll.
Had a chance.
Yeah, that was it. No, I'm really glad, and I think it's going to be really informative for our audience to hear kind of what's going on in all the corners of the world. So thank you for coming on and telling us about your little corner of the community.
No, it was absolutely my pleasure, and yeah, really, really happy to be on, and would be happy to come on anytime you guys send out the I guess what would the Australian
call.
bat? Yeah, the bat signal, like just like a giant
Like
like
the beacons.
yeah, right, like like beacons are lit, right? And it's just like you just like look, and it's this giant fire in the sky. Like, don't swear when we're recording.
All right. Well, on that note, I think that's the perfect place to leave this. So thank you, Luke.
Thank you, guys.
So that was our interview with MOTF Luke. Great dude. Love that guy. So Dustin, what are some things coming up here in the future that we can expect out of Jagged Brush Studios?
Well, I've got currently we have that giveaway going for a set of those Army Painter metallics that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Oh yeah. That goes till the end of this week, I believe. I think I put it for Valentine's Day,
Yep.
Friday.
Valentine's Day. I'm working on a few new videos. I do live stream about once a week. I'm still landing on a firm day of the week that I'm going to do that. Thursdays are probably looking like what it's going to be. I'll be at Gen Con. That'll be the next big event that I'm going to be at. So if you're there, say hi.
Oh, nice.
And I've got a bunch of projects on my table. So I'm working on finishing up some clones for a customer, and I will never paint these for myself again. And just I'm hoping to start working on some terrain. I have a Yavin table in mind that I'd like to build.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about this game, right? Like, there's so many opportunities for hobby in this game and to be creative, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
I really enjoy. Yeah, if you can get involved in creating your own table that puts some sense of ownership there, I enjoy building the Endor table that I have. But there's all kinds of opportunities. If you're not a painter, build something. If you're not a builder, find some way to contribute to your own stuff and make it yours.
All right. Anything else, Evan?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Well, cool. Dustin, thanks for joining us this week. You can check out Dustin on any of his social media, Jagged Brush Studios, or on his YouTube channel. Also, roughly once a month or so, Dustin will have videos on the Fifth Trooper YouTube channel talking about hobbying and how to get into it, how to base. Recently, the video that you did with basing, that was pretty great. And so very excited to have you on board and producing content.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too. Some of the locals might not be happy with me, but here we are.
Oh, yeah. So Dustin's from Stabcast territory. So we snatched him right up from under him. But if you guys listen to the latest Stabcast, you'll know that we actually own Stabcast now too, because I bought him a burger. So that was the going rate.
The easiest.
I didn't even get a burger out of this.
No, just more work. But all right, everybody, thanks for listening. Join us next week for another great episode of The Fifth Trooper.
Everyone, stay rad.
Join us next week for another edition of the Fifth Trooper podcast.
This has been a Fifth Trooper production.